was a painter of horses, and he was an equestrian painter, and was what they consider a master of anatomy, and he expressed his natural fondness and curiosity through these paintings. As you can see, there's deep contrast, and what I like is he played with scale. I mean, it's so cute, that large animal. I thought it was interesting that he painted the foreground animals first, and then the background and the sky later. So anybody in here that's ever actually created art, that's kind of unusual, and I would think pretty hard. So he would often paint over the outline of the figures, and then go back and figure the figure on top of that. So it's kind of like figures first, then background, and then he would go back to the animal in the foreground. And what you're seeing here is called atmospheric perspective. And what that means is that towards the back, it's actually getting lighter as opposed to darker. A lot of times in interior renderings or paintings, you will see that the far away from the viewer it gets darker because you're not, like for instance, if I was to paint or render a hallway, towards the end of the hallway probably would be darker and not as much detail, but at the outside, with this being an example, this would be considered atmospheric perspective, meaning that it's getting lighter in the background.
So so other than, I'm trying to figure out why I would consciously make more work for myself. Other than not being able to envision it in your head to the point where you're comfortable, or because you want the satisfaction of seeing the animals done first, why would anybody do it? Why would you paint something and then know you're going to paint over it and then repaint it again?
Well, I don't think he painted over the entire animal.
No, I know, but
I think
there's
right.
no hard edges left, right?
Yeah, and then go back to create that hard edge,
Right.
yeah. I mean, all I can think of is that, think of the time period. Perhaps he was painting specific horses and only had a certain time that he could spend looking at them. I mean, they didn't have photographs, I mean, you know.
Block it in. I mean,
Block it in, yeah.
I don't know.
I think maybe that was what he loved, and maybe that you, like you said, you kind of was sort of excited about that. He doesn't seem to take too much
Right,
care in
the
the
rest of it,
detail.
there isn't a lot of excitement in the rest of it.
Exactly, so maybe he
probably
was just jumped in, yeah.
Maybe that's how he motivated himself.
This is Claude Monet's wife, Camille, with a small dog. Camille was only 18 when she met Monet, who was 7 years older and a poor painter at the time, which I thought was interesting. Camille became his girlfriend, mistress, and eventually his wife and model. And this was in 1866, and these are two dogs that he painted. I thought it was interesting that he kind of took a lot of care. You know, typically you don't think of Monet as a portrait painter, but I mean, really, he was excellent at the portrait, right? Although I don't think she looks particularly feminine, maybe she wasn't, who knows? But I really think that he did a fascinating job creating her face. But then on the dog, it's sort of like that impressionism that you might recognize through Monet, and sort of these soft lines. So he had his own style. On the left is Monet at his gardens outside of Paris, and then a dog. This is early photography, right? So he's an older man by then. Now his gardens are open as a museum. And then on the right is Camille again at a later date, probably in the 1880s when, is that, I wonder if it has the date there. I wonder if that says 81.
81.
And I can't read it. But this is Camille as an older woman. Okay, so this is a funny one that I'm sure a lot of you have seen. I know, I had to research what was the original, who did the original cheating dogs, right? Because there's always someone cheating there, because you can see it's the white bulldog. And by the way, it's not always the bulldog, it's not always the one in the front. I've seen different versions for whatever reason, right? So this one was made by C.M. Coolidge, a friend in need, and it was painted in the early 1900s. And it's perhaps one of his most famous ones. It depicts 7 dogs sitting around a table playing poker in the wee morning hours. You can see that in the clock in the back. It derives its name from the bulldog handing an ace under the table to his friend, with an additional ace, the dog, with his back to the viewer, has 4 aces. So it's sort of funny. I think it's become like a pop culture joke, right? But it's pretty popular. I showed this to middle school kids, this slideshow, and they knew this painting, so I thought that was interesting. And then this one, we really don't know too much about this artist. He's an Italian artist. This is used very, very often in art schools, or even elementary and middle schools, to show students action and rhythm. So showing energy and movement in painting, because that's kind of a hard concept, on a flat plane. So this particular one was painted in 1912, and all that we really know about it is that it's a woman with a leash dog, maybe a poodle, maybe a terrier, and all we really know is that she was a widow, and that this artist connected himself with something called, with this tiny little subsect of artists that associated himself with futurism. But that's really all we know, so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then we have Frida Kahlo, the Mexican artist, with her favorite pet dog, and it is pronounced Xolotl. And his name, the name of the breed is called Xolotl, and his name was Mr. I'm gonna say it wrong. It's Xoloti. So Zolti, maybe? I think the X is pronounced with a Z, but it's Xoloti. And this dog is a hairless dog, a hairless breed. You could see a tiny one. They kind of look like dachshunds, but now that I told you it's hairless, it probably makes more sense. And then you see this tiny one over there. I didn't realize they came in that small. Reminds me of a chihuahua. But this ancestry is traceable back 3,000 years to the Aztecs. Hence their appeal to Frida, because as you can see from her, if you know much about Frida, you know that this wasn't a woman that dressed of her time. In the 1930s, this is not what women were wearing in America, and certainly not what they were wearing in Mexico. So she wore clothing of the past as an homage to her own ancestry. And it's a short and sort of rare nowadays. It's like a hairless chihuahua. And the Aztecs both revered but also ate these xolos. Xolos are prized for an enormous amount of heat their bodies generate, although they do not have a higher than average body temperature. As a result, many suffer from rheumatism and arthritis. Keeping Xolos as pets, calming the dogs, relieve their pain by acting as canine heaters. So I thought that was pretty cool. But you really don't see them, at least I don't see them around. This woman is a Venezuelan woman who spent most of her life in Paris. Her name is Marisol Escobar, and she's known for these very, very boxy figures, and the family dog on a leash. And she is again, these are symbols. These are symbols of the female in the 1960s being boxed in by her own gender, boxed in by her own society, boxed in by her own choosing, boxed in by her own choices. And then with that, you can see the next generation of women illustrated in the girl being boxed in as well. And even the dog, to some degree, being enslaved by his own decisions or by the decisions of his master. So it was really, it's a feminist piece. And I believe that's in the Museum of Modern Art. Here's some famous pugs. Who's the guy on the left? Yeah, Andy Warhol had a pug. I didn't know that until recently. We kind of know him for being a cat hoarder. Andy Warhol was a pop artist in the 1960s. He had a bald head that you will never see because he always covered it with a shaggy silver wig. And his original name was Andy Warhol. He moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to New York City, became a commercial shoe illustrator, and then found success in silk screens, specifically with duplicating a very, very low product off of a supermarket shelf, like for instance the Brillo pad or a Campbell soup can, and elevating it to high art. He only died in 1987. He lived a long life, and when he did die, they found that his house had a lot of cats, a lot of wigs, a lot of shoes, and a lot of stuff, and all that stuff is now cataloged, and it's in the Pittsburgh Museum, the Warhol Museum. But he did have a pub. In the middle is King George, and he was slated to be the next King of England, and yet he fell in love with this woman, Wallis. And it was a huge scandal because she was American. Oh my gosh.
And divorced.
And divorced, yes. And then what do you know?
Ed-
It was Edward.
Oh, it was Edward, yes. George was the brother that stuttered, you're right, yes. That's what it was, yes. Thank you. And so scandal erupted, and he abdicated his throne for her. Can you believe it? And it's pretty interesting. There's a movie, I think it's titled W.E.B. That was her initials. And, oh no, that was Wallace and Edward, W.E. And the movie was written and produced by Madonna. And it's actually really well done if you have any interest in their story. And they always had pugs. If you look them up, they've had tons and tons of pugs. And they were lived in exile after he abdicated the throne. And they lived in, I think it was the French Riviera, I want to say. And so they lived there for the rest of their
that's
life.
where I.
Yeah, right? Not so shabby. And then this is the designer, Valentino, who has a pug. Andrew Wyeth comes from a family of artists. His father was N.C. Wyeth. N.C. Wyeth was killed in a train wreck along with, I believe it was Andrew's son. They